Welcome back here to another edition of Daily Dozen Sports, the Thursday edition. Nick Teague here from Lubbock, joined by Red Raider Nation Sports Director David Collier. We're here getting ready for regional action here from Lubbock. Going to talk a little softball, but before that, we're going to talk all things NBA Draft Combine. Red Raiders sending quite a few, Red Raiders sending Christian Anderson, the Big 12 sending quite a few prospects of their own. We're going to be joined by David Warrington, a lot of Davids on the show, from Des Moines to talk about Iowa State. They sent a few to the Combine themselves, and we'll be wrapped up by a special guest from D1 softball, Justin McLeod, as he's going to look at all the regionals that the Big 12 is taking part in. But yeah, as we said, getting started here, the NBA Draft Combine, Big 12 sending 17 prospects. It's no surprise, one of the deepest conferences in college basketball. You look at the big names, you have A.J. DeBonsa, Darren Peterson, Christian Anderson there, a little bit lower in the first round. Kingston Flemings from Houston. But yeah, David, kind of a look around that NBA Draft Combine, kind of those initial thoughts coming out of the Big 12. What are we seeing so far from those initial reactions?
Well, I say this, as far as looking ahead to next year, man, a lot of rosters to be rebuilt, right, in the Big 12. So all the Red Raider fans here in Lubbock certainly concerned with the lack of movement in the portal. You're not alone here. I mean, basically the entire Arizona basketball starting five is there. I think they have 4 people. In fact, they do, and Houston both with 4 players at the NBA Combine there in Chicago. But you kind of mentioned it. I mean, obviously the 1 and 2 more than likely going in the draft are both Big 12 prospects. I guess it just comes down to the Washington Wizards prefer Darren Peterson or A.J. DeBonsa. Utah has the second pick. There's a lot of intrigue there just because of A.J. DeBonsa went to Utah. Matt Young, the head coach of the Cougars, was an NBA guy, basically handpicked by some guy named Danny Ainge, who just happens to be in the front office for the Utah Jazz. You can connect the dots there, and I think if you watched the draft lottery this past weekend, you could see A.J. DeBonsa wasn't necessarily excited with the number 1 overall pick being the Washington Wizards. But I guess which way would you go if you're the Wizards is my question.
And that's the thing is I think you can kind of take your pick, and I don't know if they're going to essentially give the Jazz what they want. If it was a consensus, like say it's like a Cooper Flagg or a Victor Wembanyama that we've seen the past years where it's like, yeah, we're not passing on this guy. But here where it's like there's so much intrigue, I think DeBonsa has the slight edge. But again, if he kind of prefers to be in Utah, which it sounds weird for them to kind of give the prospect what they want, but when you're not really getting that much of a downgrade in Peterson, they may just take Peterson since he may be happier. And again, DeBonsa may be, fine being number 2. You get to stay in Utah. As you mentioned, he went to BYU. He likes the state of Utah. It seemed like he was really torn between staying at BYU or going to the NBA. And so again, if he gets to play for the hometown Jazz squad, that's going to appease him. That's going to appease Jazz fans. And of course, there's always the question of, do the Jazz even stay at number 2? I mean, what is Washington willing to give up for number 1? As we mentioned, if the Jazz are willing to send them a couple more picks and they're moving down one spot and they really want Darren Peterson to begin with, why not just keep your cards close to your chest and say, oh, yeah, we'll give you number 1 if you're going to give us extra stuff as well. So I don't know. I think either one that you take when it comes to those 2, you're kind of getting a good deal. Peterson had the concerns where he was, resting a lot with Kansas, but he showed flashes of being one of the best players in college. DeBonsa, we saw firsthand here in Lubbock the impact that he can have on a game. So I think either one of those 2. And David, want to throw in, you mentioned 1 and 2 are probably there. Never happened in the Big 12. So if that happens, we're going to have record-breaking moment here for the conference.
I will say this. I would imagine the Washington Wizards will trade down just to get the extra whatever it is, picks or players from Utah. Because I do have a feeling that the Jazz really do want DeBonsa. Those are just 2 of the guys. If you look at mock drafts, at least 9 Big 12 players projected to go in the first round. And that's you got a couple of the guys from Baylor, clearly Kingston Flemings, who you mentioned earlier, and Chris Sinak, the big for Houston. He's a guy that could be a lottery pick. I saw, I think, mid to late round. And, of course, here in Lubbock, Christian Anderson there, and a lot of Red Raider fans hoping that maybe he will return. He did say during an interview there in Chicago this week that he's 100% locked in on the NBA draft process at this point. Didn't rule out coming back to Texas Tech, but Now, the one knock that did come there in Chicago for Christian Anderson, a little bit shorter than what he was listed here in Lubbock. He was listed at 6'3" by Texas Tech, just over 6 foot tall. That certainly is not something you want if you're Christian Anderson. And he's a little, I mean, I don't want to say slight, but he is a smaller basketball player. Now, he did make up for all of that with his ability to shoot the basketball there in Chicago earlier this week. He had I think he was the third best shooter overall. He was the best shooter of the guards off the dribble. He was tied for the best shooter in a three-point shooting drill. So I think we all know here in West Texas his capability of scoring the basketball from beyond the arc, and that doesn't even mention his ability to pass the basketball as well. But it'll be interesting. I mean, 9 players potentially going in the first round, and there's a couple of other guys. You mentioned 17 people there. There are a couple of Iowa State or / former Iowa State players there. That's something we'll discuss a little bit later, but it'll be interesting to see how many Big 12 athletes get picked on, I guess, late June there in the NBA draft.
So, as you mentioned, there's just a lot of potential prospects to be taken, and there's 2 that we didn't quite touch on that we'll get into whenever we come back here on Daily Dozen Sports. Going to be joined by David Warrington from WHO in Des Moines to talk a little Iowa State basketball and football. We'll be right back here on Daily Dozen Sports. And welcome back into the Thursday edition of Daily Dozen Sports. Nick Teague, David Collier, joined now by another David Warrington from WHO 13 in Des Moines, Iowa. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. We just wrapped up talking about the NBA Draft Combine. Iowa State sending 2 players, Joshua Johnson and Milan Momcilovic, to Chicago to take part in the Combine. David, what are we hearing from Chicago about the potential of these Cyclones to head to the NBA?
Yeah, so we'll start with Joshua Jefferson, and he really is just perfectly built for the NBA. He's a 6'8", 6'9" point forward, and he's kind of, from what I've been hearing, grading out as late first round to early second round, potentially Brooklyn, Sacramento, or a couple teams that are in there. But he's got a skill set that I think will transfer really perfectly into the NBA once he gets that opportunity. He's a very good three-point shooter, good ball handler. Like I said, kind of can play that point forward position. So he's kind of ready-made for the NBA, and I think it's going to be a good fit for him wherever he ends up. And the one that's probably a little more interesting is Milan Momcilovic, because regardless of where Jefferson's going to go, not going to go, he's out of eligibility. He's 4 years and he's done. Milan's a junior, so he has another year left. So he doesn't have to stay in the combine or stay in the NBA draft, but he might, because he's got the skill set just from his three-point shooting alone. He was the best three-point shooter in the country this past season, percentage-wise. I mean, some games he felt like he couldn't miss. There are a couple places he should probably work on a little bit in his game. His defense could pick up a little bit, but certainly the shooting alone makes him an interesting NBA prospect to look at as we go through the process here.
So I guess the next question with Momcilovic is he going to be back in Ames? I know he's in the portal, and I've seen a couple of other schools certainly interested in him. If you had to put a number on him being back in a Cyclone uniform, what's that percentage?
1 to 10, I'd go with a 0. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because from what I understand, him and TJ had a conversation. TJ understands what Milan wants, and that's to go pro. And Milan understands that TJ needs to stack his roster, and he's done that. He's made some big-time transfer portal acquisitions. I believe he's brought in 5 new players from the portal to the point where they're full. I believe they're at a 15-man roster. So if Milan does go back to school, it's not going to be in Ames, as much as that breaks the hearts of Cyclone fans and as much as they'd love to have him back. I've heard Kentucky's interested. Louisville, I believe St. John's has been linked to him as well. So there's a few people out there looking after him, which is unsurprising, and he's going to make a lot of money if he goes back to college, but it will not be in Ames. And never say never. It's not completely impossible, but I would be completely shocked if it happened.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these big additions. Are there any kind of names that we can share, or anything that kind of may pop out to add to that roster for the Cyclones?
Yeah, so of those additions, one that I think is really interesting is Trey Singleton. He was just finished up his freshman season at Northwestern, so obviously playing really good competition, playing in the Big Ten. And he averaged 7.5 points, almost 5 rebounds. He's 6'8", athletic, can handle it a little bit. So I think he could end up being a really good player for Iowa State. Certainly, as they'll need to add in some extra size, losing Joshua Jefferson. Another player, couple players actually coming out of the Missouri Valley Conference, so taking a jump up. Leon Bond is the first one. He started his career, I want to say, at Virginia, and then played a couple years at UNI over in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And now he's moving on to Iowa State, and he's a really interesting player. He's super long, super athletic, really good scorer, can shoot. So he's going to be someone that fits right into that offense. And then another one, Jaquan Johnson, also from the MVC. He played at Bradley, and he's a different type of player. He's like 5'11", really, really strong guard, and he's first and foremost a defensive guy, and that's what TJ Otzelberger is built on. He's always been defense first, and that's kind of what Jaquan Johnson brings to the table. So I think he'll mesh in perfectly with their aggressive trapping defense.
All right, transitioning to football now, David. Man, what an offseason it has been for Cyclone fans. You knew this was it seems like it'd been the talk like every offseason for like a decade now. Matt Campbell had been linked to this job and that job. Well, it officially happened, him leaving for Penn State. What's the mood, what's the vibe been like since the hiring of Jimmy Rogers as he tries to take over and carry on what has been a successful program there during the Campbell era?
Yeah, there's no doubt. For years, it felt like, oh, this might happen. He might go here, he might go there. But it's like, we'll believe it when it happens. We'll believe it when we see it. And then it finally happened. And it moved so fast. It was just a surprising process. But, this Iowa State's credit, they wasted no time. They got Jimmy Rogers in-house as soon as they could, and they got to work because they had a ton of work to do in the transfer portal. They lost almost every starter, but they know how to do this. Jimmy Rogers essentially did the same thing at Washington State last year, and they didn't have a great season, but they didn't have a bad season either. They were 6-6, played a couple good teams competitively. So I think the vibes are probably about as good as they can be given the circumstances. I mean, I don't think I'm sure they expect to win every game, but from the outside looking in, people don't expect them to win the Big 12, win 10 games, anything like that. But I think this is a team that feels they can be competitive, week in, week out, and they probably think they have the guys that can fill some of those gaps. And like I said, there are a lot of gaps to fill.
I'm sure there's a lot of football fans in the Big 12 conference that's wondering more about Jimmy Rogers as well. He's been successful, just not at the D1 level, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. He was he's a guy that played at South Dakota State and then was an assistant coach there when they won a couple national titles, and then he got the head job. In year one, he came in and won a national title himself. So, I mean, on one hand, that was a team that was just roaring, ready to go.
Yeah.
So it's not like it was the hardest coaching job in the world, but a national title is a national title. I mean, he came in, he got it done, and so he has a national championship under his belt. And like I said, given the circumstances at Washington State last year, that 6-6 record is pretty impressive because it was it's a similar situation here. They lost 50 guys, brought in 50 guys, give or take. So that was a pretty good coaching job. I'm sure the people over in Pullman would have liked to see what he could have done in year two, but we'll see if he can kind of replicate that at Iowa State and then see how that looks moving forward, year two, year three, if he can continue adding on.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked for basketball. You mentioned 50 transfers out, 50 transfers in, exact number, 54 out, 49 in, semantics. But who are some of those guys that are looking to fill the gaps that you talked about that Iowa State needs to get back to that upper echelon in the Big 12?
So I think one guy that's going to come in and make an instant impact is Jalen Rayner, who is more likely than not going to be their starting quarterback. They haven't officially come out and said it, but he seems to be the one that's led the competition throughout the spring. He played at Arkansas State, where he was a very good player. He actually, when Iowa State came to Arkansas State last year, he played against the Cyclones, and he gave them a run for their money. It ended up being like a one-score game. Jalen Rayner, he can throw. He's very competent at throwing the ball, but where he really makes his money is getting out of the pocket, scrambling, making things happen. And additionally, they brought over his quarterback coach to Ames. So he's, it's not a totally new situation for him. He's got a familiar face in the room with him. So I think that'll help. And then one of the guys he'll be handing it off to is Cameron Petaway, who was a really breakout player at Bowling Green last year. And I think he's the type of guy who, given the right opportunity, could really make a splash at the Big 12 level. And there will be some other guys in that running back room alongside him. But I think those are a couple of guys that could make an instant impact this season.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, David, for that insight into Iowa State basketball and football. Look forward to seeing how the Cyclones rebuild and compete again in the Big 12. Thank you so much. Talk to you again here soon. And we're going to be right back here on Daily Dozen Sports to talk all things NCAA Regionals with D1 Softball's Justin McLeod.
Back on Daily Dozen Sports, time to talk NCAA softball. Regional play is here, and to get us set, none other than Justin McLeod, the managing editor of D1 Softball. Justin, nice to see you. It's the first time I've seen you since Oklahoma City. I'm planning on seeing you again here in a few weeks.
I thought it would be a few weeks before we connected again. This is a nice middle of the road meeting.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, on Daily Dozen Sports, it's pretty self-explanatory. We talk Big 12 athletics. Your thoughts on the field of Big 12 teams that were selected on Sunday, and maybe if there's somebody besides a Texas Tech or Oklahoma State that could find their way into a super regional.
I actually think this field's really, really a good showing for the Big 12. Like, I was really impressed with the conference finishing the job. If you think about some of those teams getting in, like a Kansas or a Baylor, like how many times in the last few years have we seen those teams, crater a little bit kind of right at the end? I was impressed with how the group of teams finished to kind of cement their way into the tournament. Tech and Oklahoma State are certainly the two top of the list, right? That to go to the World Series in terms of Big 12 teams. My thing though is, if Arizona gets on a heater, you're talking about you possibly win the Durham Regional, you go to Fayetteville. They're familiar with Bogle Park. That's a place where the home run ball flies. Obviously, Arizona's specialty. Yeah. There's a world where I see Arizona being able to pull it off. I think that's the thing too, though. Like, that's one reason I think it's such a good showing for the Big 12 is I don't think any of these teams are overmatched either. I think they all have decently positive outlooks, and for a group that big, that's kind of impressive to me.
Another one I was thinking, maybe prove me wrong here, maybe Arizona State with Kinsey Brown pitching. A&M certainly shown they've been susceptible to losing in the first round, right, or the first weekend.
No. For sure. And that's the thing, too, because remember, you've got the familiarity of several members of that Texas A&M coaching staff that were at ASU before. So you've got the intertwined things in there and things like that. The biggest thing for me with Arizona State, I think Kinsey Brown's good enough to get them all the way to the World Series. The biggest issue there is you got to run through the Texas offense in the Super, even if you win the College Station Regional. Yeah. So, I do think Arizona State's got a legitimate chance. Like, it's always hard for me to say a regional host is going to get upset. Yeah. But I do think they've got a very reasonable chance of making it to the Supers. And if Texas has a bad weekend and Kinsey Brown and especially Mika Lupi, as a number 2, are really solid, there's a world where it happens. It's just that Texas team can be a little bit of a juggernaut sometimes.
Yep, no doubt about that.
So, Justin, we're looking here at the seeds that the Big 12 got. You have 2 in Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. Texas Tech down there at number 11, just one spot difference from where they were last year at number 12. You obviously at D1 Softball create a poll. Texas Tech really not outside of the top 5. Maybe talk a little bit about how the Red Raiders found themselves all the way down there at number 11, not being a super regional host after kind of being up there in the poll and winning 50 games, and a lot of people here in Lubbock expecting them to be kind of firmly within that top 8.
The biggest thing is it's that strength of schedule and those metrics. They just aren't in Texas Tech's favor. The kicker is I am in the camp of metrics have a place, but metrics honestly cannot be everything. And I know in today's it's 2026 and analytics are all the things, so I get that I'm probably on the unpopular side of that these days. But for me, I think the eye test has to matter. That said, at this point it doesn't. At this point, it's the metrics. The metrics are what determine our seeds, and so that's where Texas Tech falters. Even for as good of a team as Texas Tech has looked, even for sweeping through the conference, winning all the series, all these different things, that's the biggest piece, and that's really the only piece that drug them down so hard. Their RPI stayed about that range for a good portion of the year. The kicker is, for as high as we had them ranked, so our top 25 poll, along with others, that's strictly eye test, right? You can certainly look at whose metrics are there, but you vote based on who you think's the best. For as high as they were there, they never really got that high in the RPI. In the first couple of weeks, when you play the teams they played in Clearwater, things like that, they were closer. But through much of the year, they were in that, early double digits range. That's the biggest thing, is that, those metrics just not completely in Texas Tech's favor. RPI, based on who they played, the strength of schedule, it just wasn't in Tech's favor.
All right, another team we haven't talked enough about, Oklahoma State. What are your thoughts on that program? Obviously, Ruby Malin proved that she can, much like Kinsey Brown, can win some big softball games with wins over Oklahoma and Texas in the non-conference. Is that something they can do in a regional, or are they built to make it far enough and get to Oklahoma City?
Without sliding Oklahoma State's roster outside of Ruby, that team's going to go as far as Ruby Malin takes them. I mean, there are offensive weapons. Don't get me wrong. Like Rosie Davis is still high on the list of players that I don't want to face with a game on the line in the bottom of the seventh and Oklahoma State down. You know, I don't want to face Carly Godwin. We know what she's capable of. You look at that offense; there are playmakers, but that team's going to go as far as Ruby Malin can take them. That stretch of games where you mentioned Oklahoma and Texas, you had the Arizona series in there. I think Baylor was also in that stretch. Like that showed you what that team could be when Ruby put them on her back and the rest of the team followed suit. They're capable of making it all the way to the series. Ruby Malin, honestly, is a pitcher who deserves to have a national championship ring if it was just rewarding effort and performance. That's not how it goes. We go win and loss. I get that. But that Oklahoma State team's going to go as far as Ruby can take them. I just happen to think she can take them pretty darn far.
All right, before we let you go, is a Big 12 team making it to Oklahoma City? Are the Red Raiders going to be able to keep the offense going and get the home run ball out of the ballpark here in Lubbock in this regional and potentially down in Gainesville? Who knows? Texas State might beat Florida. We might be having a super regional here anyway, and everybody was complaining for nothing.
I think at least one Big 12 gets there. I think at least one Big 12 team gets there. I think everybody's going to have a hard road. But I think at least one Big 12 team gets there. Truth be told, I think there's a world where there's two. And if there's two, I think there's a world where Arizona's one of them. That's my hot take, I guess, here.
There we go. How about that? You got anything else for him, Nick?
No, I mean, that was my last question. There was going to be, who do you think? I mean, I'm inclined to ask maybe a brief rundown of who you think makes it. If you can rapid fire the 8 teams, just rapid fire that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be mostly chalk. I mean, I think Oklahoma gets there for sure. I like Alabama. I like Texas. I know what I just said about Arizona, but I do like Arkansas. I like Nebraska. After that, it gets a little more interesting, but I think I'd probably go UCLA as the 6, maybe Tech. What am I at? Am I at 7 or 8 right there? Math was never my strong suit.
I think it was 7. You can throw one more in there. If it's 9, it's not the end of the world.
I know Florida State's out, so I'm gonna say Tennessee. That pitching staff's strong enough to get them there.
Fantastic. Well, you're the man that probably knows it better than us too. So Justin, thank you very much for joining us here. We look forward to maybe talking to you again as we get closer to the College World Series. But that will about do it here for our time on Daily Dozen Sports. For David Warrington, Justin McLeod, and David Collier here in studio in Lubbock, we'll see you next time here. Morgantown has the show tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.